Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to get us going now. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to see such a large crowd here today. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Wenteng Tang. He's the Stanley Hua-Hsia Professor of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Iowa. He's going to be speaking to us on Chinese political culture and authoritarian regime resiliency. And that is the same thing that's up there, which doesn't always happen. So my name's Bill Reisinger. I am on the ICFRC board and chair of the program committee, and very happy to welcome you today. As most of you, I hope, know, the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council hosts programs that address topics of international interest. And I want to begin by thanking our members, the volunteers and interns, because these people make our forums possible and have been doing so since the Brinks warehouse at Heathrow Airport was robbed of 3 tons of gold bars, which in 1983 dollars was worth $37.5 million. I also want to acknowledge our university and community sponsors, the University of Iowa's international programs and the University of Iowa Honors Program. They contribute vital time, talent, and logistics to our organization. I also thank the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their ongoing financial support, and today's 2 new special financial sponsors, Dave, Denise, and Mike Tiffany, and Janet Linus and John Wadsworth. Actually, I don't think either are new, but we thank them very much for making this support possible, and we appreciate their help. Our programs are also made possible thanks to City Channel 4, which professionally records our programs for cablecast on City Channel 4 or 118-2. I don't know what that means, but that's important, I'm sure, somehow. We encourage you to like City Channel 4 on Facebook, and we also thank the University of Iowa Library's digital archives, which make our past shows available. One additional reminder, we are now in the midst of our annual membership campaign for the 2016-17 academic year. In addition to forms mailed to members in July, there are membership forms in the back at the registration desk, and this is also a good time to renew your prepaid meal cards. Okay. You will see on your tables our little short surveys. We do like getting your input and ideas about our talks, and in particular about speakers and topics that we should be considering for spring semesters. So we would welcome you filling out those. And one more announcement is we're happy to note that we have new comfortable padded chairs that we'll be able to use from now on. So that's great. Our format today will be the usual one. Following our speaker's presentation, which will be about 1 o'clock, we'll have a short break for people who need to leave to do so, and then a 15-minute Q&A from written questions that are submitted from the audience. And each table has index cards that you can write down your questions on, and they'll be collected at the end, and we'll get to as many as we can as time permits. Please now at this point silence your cell phones or other electronic devices. If you do need to leave early, we ask that you do so as quietly as possible so you won't disturb others. All right, now I get to introduce today's speaker. Wenteng Tang, as I mentioned, is the Stanley Hua-Hsia Professor of Political Science and International Studies here at the university. After getting his PhD from the University of Chicago in 1990, he carved out a reputation as one of the foremost, if not the foremost, US-based expert on public opinion and political change in contemporary China. He travels frequently to China for ongoing collaboration with Chinese scholars on public opinion surveys, and has been responsible for introducing a number of innovations in the techniques with which surveys are done in the most sophisticated fashion, and has brought back to us a lot of findings about Chinese society. He's co-authored several books. His most recent, just coming out this year, is called Populist Authoritarianism, which Oxford University Press published a few months ago. He has just this month begun serving as chair of Iowa's Political Science Department, and I realize we're really lucky that we scheduled him for this talk before he understood how much work is really entailed. So please join me in welcoming Wenteng Tang.
Thank you, Bill, for the introduction. I'm very glad today to be here to share with you my observation of China, which is the country where I was born. I went to college in China. As Bill said, I came to this country for graduate school and I never made it back. I stayed here, but now of course I do research and I travel back to China frequently. I think as Bill mentioned, that I do public opinion surveys in China. I feel like it is oftentimes people think that you are from that country, so you know that country. And I don't, the more I observe China, the more I realize that's not necessarily the case. Because when I think about China, I only know my friends, my family, right? I don't know China. So the more I want to know China, the more I think doing public opinion surveys is so important, because in the first step of doing public opinion survey is you draw a representative sample of, let's say, 2,000 people, right? That 2,000 people has to be representative of the entire population of China. And that's a very scientific process, and you have to follow strict steps in order to do that. So today, in addition to my personal observations of China, I would like also to share with you some results from the public opinion surveys I conducted in the past 20-some years, right? There's a minor technical problem. As you may have noticed, the screen is a little too small. So if you, I will try my best to describe what's on the slides, but I would really appreciate it if you have any questions related to, if you are unclear about certain things on the slides, about what I talk about, let's see, some concepts or some numbers, please stop me in the process. You don't have to wait until the end, okay? So the the other thing I want to mention is I was talking to Bill about where to engage the audience, and the audience I never know how to engage the audience, because it's non-China specialists, right? But highly informed. So I thought maybe the audience of New York Times might be a good place to gauge the audience, right? So that's probably where I should approach my topic. As you may know, that in the late 80s and early 90s, communist regimes in the Soviet Union, in Central and Eastern Europe, collapsed. Right? But since then, people have been waiting for the Chinese communist regime to collapse. That's been 25, 26 years. It doesn't look like it's collapsing, right? It's going strong. So people in the China field started to try to find explanations why this regime is not collapsing as compared to other communist regimes. And here are some of the theories people developed. One is economic performance. Chinese economy has taken off. People have been living in much better life now than 20, 30 years ago. So people are happy. That's why they support the government. My problem with the theory is, if you see other countries with rapid economic growth, their political support for their governments are not necessarily high, right? I'm thinking about India would be an example, Brazil would be an example, Mongolia next to China would be an example. If you look at public opinion polls in those countries, you see pretty low level of political support for their governments. So for me, economic performance may not be the only explanation, right? The other quite popular explanation is Chinese Confucian traditional culture. And because this Confucianism emphasizes hierarchy, right? Disobedience. So people say that's why. And Confucian people living in China where Confucianism originated tend to pay undisputed respect to authorities. That's why you have a strong support for their government. And so that explanation for me is again problematic, because if you look at other Confucian societies, right, you have Taiwan, you have South Korea, Japan to a certain extent. These are all democracies, right? So Confucianism doesn't necessarily lead to authoritarianism. So the cultural explanation is problematic to me. Then the final theory is the media control theory. And people say the Chinese Communist government controls the media, and they only show rosy pictures about Chinese society, about how capable the government is in satisfying people's needs, right? So you don't see the negative news like in Western democracies, and it's a totally open environment. You see different news, and you can process the information yourself there, and it's controlled reasoning. For that, and if you look at the internet in Chinese society these days, and you will immediately not believe that explanation. Yes, you still have the network news, the equivalent of network news every day, right? A lot of people watch it. But if you go on the internet, you will see a very lively political activism on the internet. A lot of people are very open in criticizing the government policies, and even direct criticism of the government. So if you think about that, one example is recently there is a trial of human rights lawyers. If you read New York Times, I'm sure you read those articles. And then it's for the first time in Chinese media, the government, not first time, it's very rare. The Chinese government actually use the terms like direct, what's the term? Anti-government. The accusation is anti-government activities, trying to overthrow the government. Normally, they would use other excuses. They would say, hey, you dumped the garbage somewhere illegally on the street, and that's why you're arrested, but the real reason is political, right? But this time it's direct. That's interesting to me, that's rare. But what's even more interesting is the comments. Right under that news, that piece of news is in the official Chinese website, right? And you have tens of thousands of comments immediately following that piece of news, and ranging from very conservative to very liberal. I was trying to ask my graduate students to try to grab the comments. Within hours, they disappeared. But what's interesting for me is the spectrum, how widely spread political opinions are in Chinese society. So if you read those things, you may not believe that media control is effective anymore in China, right? And people do think very differently. So what's more problematic to me, in addition to these existing theories, is the problem of in Chinese society. If you read New York Times again, you will see a lot of media coverage of protests, right? Of high-profile protests, and sometimes tens of thousands of people are involved in these. Quite often, these are cases and people may read. So for me, the contradiction is why you have the communist government still functioning well, and as I show you, strong political support in public opinion. In the meantime, you have hundreds and thousands of cases of protests in Chinese society. How do these two things coexist? That's what I feel like there's a need to go beyond the existing theories and explanations and studies about Chinese society. What I come up with is this term, populist authoritarianism. I know the prints are really small. It's really hard to read for people in the back. Let me just describe them. And there are 6 components, basically, in this explanation I propose. Right? And the first component I call ideological foundation. Let me just go back a little bit. Populist authoritarianism is a term I used to describe Chinese political culture, right? In this political culture, and I can explain why conflict, protests coexist with strong political support, why these two things can coexist. Okay, and so specifically in this explanation, I propose there's a strong ideological tradition. It's called the mass line. Mass line. I'll explain every one of them in detail after the slide. So there's an ideological tradition of mass line. It's a political populism tradition. Then there's a social foundation. I call it social foundation of strong interpersonal trust. Then the third component is political activism. You know, you have this ideological tradition of mass line. You have social foundation of strong social capital and interpersonal trust. Those two things would lead to high level of political activism. And in addition to activism, also contentious politics. People are very, probably more likely to confront authorities than people in other societies, actually, in this kind of tradition, right? So high level of political activism. Then the next component is government responsiveness. The government tends to respond to these public demands, right? Related to that is weak political institutions. And government responds directly to public demands, oftentimes bypassing institutions, like elections are not effective, rule of law is not effective, independent social organizations are non-existent. So these things are missing, but so it's the contact, the interaction is more direct. And the result of that is you have the further underdevelopment of these democratic institutions, right? So finally, number 6 is political trust of the government. All these things can hold together. You may be wondering, what are you talking about? But these things do hold together. So let me just go over the 6 elements one by one. And the first one is called the mass line ideology. This is a policy first articulated by the Communist Party in the 1940s, when it was fighting against the nationalists before the Communist Party took control of China, right? And that policy first was developed. And basically, if you use one sentence to describe this mass line, you can quote Mao, who said, "From the masses to the masses." Right? Basically, it says the party should collect public opinion to understand what people think, then formulate policies, then implement the policies to benefit the people. So it's a two-way interaction. So this mass line policy serves to mobilize people, to get people to express their own opinions and to participate in politics. And people are encouraged in this policy to, under this policy, to participate in politics, to express their opinions. And then there's the element of social contract. The Communist Party is supposed to collect opinion, but to meet people's needs. So the best example of this policy, of course, the Communist Party used this policy to gain political control in 1949. But after that, it continued. This policy didn't stop just because the Chinese Communist Party took control of the country. It continued in the another social event called the Cultural Revolution in the 60s. And this photo shows you Mao standing on top of the Tiananmen Gate of Heavenly Peace, waving to the Red Guards, school students, right? And that shows you, I think it's a really good example to show. And during the Cultural Revolution, all the bureaucratic institutions were destroyed. And Mao said, let's just work together. So it is a direct interaction between the very top of Chinese society and the very bottom. So that's a very good example. But that tradition not only was reflected in the Cultural Revolution, but in some other cases. The black and white photo shows the Tiananmen demonstrations. In 1989, there was urban demonstrations took place in different cities in China, right? And this is the then General Party Secretary, Zhao Ziyang, holding this microphone, right? Trying to talk to the protesters, students in Tiananmen Square. And during that time, standing next to him is China's next prime minister, right? Both of them. And they were trying to talk to students saying, well, we're in trouble at the higher up level. Other leaders are not. They don't like us. We are with you, right? And we support you. And we need to have an understanding of each other. So that was a failed attempt. But still, it shows how leaders at crucial times, moments in Chinese politics, tend to interact with ordinary people directly, bypassing all the bureaucratic rules and institutions. So if you think that's the past, the other, I can't even see that photo, okay? But let me just describe it to you. This is the current government in China, Xi Jinping. His government actually used new technology and developed a website called Mass Line. And he continued all these policies in the past. So you can see very clearly that there's a continuation of this ideology in Chinese society and the populist orientation among Chinese elites. So it's still there. So the other thing, a component of Chinese political culture is social capital or interpersonal trust. This is oftentimes used by political scientists in the West. They argue that democracy requires social capital to function. Social capital can be described as interpersonal trust. People have to trust each other to make democracy work. Right? I have to trust you to vote for you so you will represent my interests. So typically you will see a high level of interpersonal trust in Western democracies. Right? What about in China? Here is the situation in China. Again, you can't really see, but this is from across world. It's called a public opinion survey in different countries in the world. The red bar is China, right? It basically it shows you that the percentages of people in different societies answering a very simple question: do you think most people can be trusted? It's a very simple question. It's not politically sensitive. It doesn't require a lot of education to answer that question, but it's a simple question. It's designed on purpose to be simple, so people can very quickly tell what they really think. Right? And so the top 5 are the Netherlands, China, Sweden, New Zealand, Australia. Right? So the top 5, over 50%. The top 5 have over 50% of people in their societies think that most people can be trusted. 4 of them are Western democracies. China is an exception. That is very interesting to me. And I've done public opinion surveys for many years. This answer in China always surprised me. Why would China have such a high level of interpersonal trust? And many people in China don't believe it. Because in the media, in China's media, there's a lot of media coverage of how much distrust Chinese society has now. Like when people fall on the street with a heart attack, and people would be so afraid that if I help and that person may accuse me as the cause of the fall, or be reliable for the medical bills. So people tend not to respond. So there's a lot of media coverage of these kind of cases. But yet if you ask people questions like this, that can be compared cross-culturally, cross-country, and you see that there's such high level of interpersonal trust. Many people think that, that's interpersonal trust in Western democracies are trust of strangers, people I don't know, right? In China, it's such a confusion, family-oriented society. That high trust means family, relatives. I did further interviews. I used further questions. I divided trust into different layers, like strangers, foreigners, colleagues, schoolmates, family members, and relatives. It turned out that the middle layer, what I call communal trust, people not family, not strangers, but your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, and the middle group of people contributes to China's interpersonal trust the most. Right? And this is important because you have to think about this Chinese, since 1949, this kind of planned economy, how people lived and worked together as a unit. Like a university is a work unit, a company is a work unit. In this unit, people feel a lot of an identity with their own units. People every day eat lunch like this. If you work together and people see each other, right? And they will have vacations together. They would go to North Korea for their tour company. I was visiting Peking University one year, and they were organizing company tour to visit North Korea. I wanted to go. They said, no, we can't. You have an American passport. You'll get arrested. But that and also if you go to China, you will see very common. That's one thing I really like is the street dance. Like in the evening after dinner, in the street corner, they will have a big speaker microphone there. They will have people from the neighborhood dancing together. They would do all sorts of different styles, from tango traditional Chinese folk dance. So that kind of atmosphere, I think, is probably related to the high level of interpersonal trust, right? If you look at the, you can't really see, but the green colors are Confucian societies. Japan, Singapore, sort of, Taiwan and South Korea, right? And Confucian societies have actually very low level of interpersonal trust. And the yellow bar is the United States, 30-some% for that question. So what's the result of this strong ideological tradition of mass line and populism, political populism, and social capital and interpersonal trust? Some people say that high level of interpersonal trust is also good for formulating strong ties. Strong ties are good for protest. If you have to go on the street, that's very risky. You can be arrested. And only because people in a group trust each other so much, and that can make them, this is an old theory. People say in the 60s in the United States, right, the civil rights movement, it's started from black churches, right? And there's a very strong interpersonal trust and strong ties there. So it seems to me that that's probably related to the high level of political activism in China, right? There's both the ideological tradition and the social foundation of interpersonal trust. So the result is political activism and contentious politics. These are just anecdotal examples. I can show you my survey results also. On the very left is a picture of a police woman in the city of Jinan, Shandong province. She got into an argument with a couple of street vendors, two people, and the bystanders got very upset with the policewoman and made her knee on the ground and to apologize and poured water over her. You can see she's wet. And as a result, she's fired by the police department. In the middle picture is the mayor of Qidong city in Jiangsu province, and that city was planning on building a wastewater processing plant with it's a joint venture, I think, with Japan, but there's some environmental uncertainty. So the protesters made the mayor strip the mayor, basically. And you can see he's begging, please, don't beat me, don't kill me. And so that later on, he was asked to put on an environmental protection T-shirt. And on the very right is another incident of a city official in Xiamen, in the city of Xiamen. A developer made signed a contract with the Xiamen city, one district, and tried to build something, but the local residents didn't think the compensation was enough. So, but she went with people to tear down the buildings or something, and they just stripped her and said, you have to apologize. So what's interesting in these cases is that all these people represent government. And people are so confrontational with governments. It shows me that there's a high level of political activism in China. And I travel to China a lot, and there are flight delays, right? And in this country, people would just go to the service center counter and just stay in line and try to get their new tickets, right? In China, they would be standing on the counter. And they would, one time actually, one flight was delayed, right? The passengers were really upset, and they saw another flight moving on the runway, they went out and blocked that flight from taking off, saying you can't take off before my flight. So that kind of stories are everywhere. If you go to China, you see that all the time. And that kind of tendency also is shown in my public opinion surveys. The survey I cooperated with, it was conducted by the Sun Yat-sen University. University of Iowa have a cooperative relationship with the Sun Yat-sen University. This survey was about employees in China, about 4,300 some employees in China. One question was, did you have any labor dispute in the past 2 years? And the answer was almost half, 47% of the employees said, yes, I had dispute, at least one dispute. So among these people who said they had disputes, some of them had one, some of them had 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And if you add the total number of disputes up, divided by the total number of people interviewed, the result is 0.85. Each employee in the past year had 0.85 dispute. That to me sounds like a very high number. Comparing with, in this society, I don't have hard evidence, but I don't see that many disputes in American society at workplace. Not in that high frequency. Some people say that, well, in China, you know, they don't really have disputes. They just tell you they do, right? For me, it doesn't really affect my argument because that shows how contentious they are, right? And how the tendency they may. They are likely to have disputes. There is this sentiment in there. So with this kind of high level of political activism and contentious politics, what does the Chinese government do? They, of course, if you again read New York Times and they tell you they arrest the top dissidents, which is very true. Right? And these people are dangerous. They are threatening to the Communist Party's rule, but only a few. They spend about 99.9% time dealing with how to respond to public demands. So that's why some people say the stability maintenance budget in China is more than the defense budget. Stability maintenance budget means you spend time to respond to people. I can just give you some high-profile incidents. This is in 2008 Wenteng earthquake in Sichuan province. Within 2 hours, the Prime Minister of China flew to the region and greeted people there. For me, that's a very prompt response to a natural disaster like that. Okay. So this is a photo of Taiwan, a democratic society, right? There's a mudslide in Taiwan, in the village. The president of Taiwan, democratically elected president, didn't show up for a week. When he showed up, and villagers were holding signs saying, "Why are you so slow?" If those are just anecdotal examples, the survey result in Taiwan and China also show a very different picture. In China, 77% of people said yes, government does respond to people's needs, and in Taiwan, 36% said yes. So there's a huge gap. This is number 5, component 5, that shows how institutions are underdeveloped in China. I'm running out of time, but the point of this slide is to show you how few people use formal channels to solve their problems. They will either take action into their own hands, or they will just protest, or they formulate their own groups to protest. They do not use court, media, government bureaus, bureaucratic rules, and the gray part, if you can see the gray part, is formal channels. People are much less likely to use formal channels to solve their problems, showing you how underdeveloped these channels are. And I think it goes back. If they don't use it, these channels are under development, next time people think, oh, these channels are ineffective, now I'm not going to use it. So it's just getting worse. The component number 6 is a strong political trust in China, right? And I use 4 different measures: trust in 7 core political institutions, like the legislature, the ruling party, and all these things. The trust level is 61%, and trusting leaders, 51%. Proud to be a citizen of China, 42%. Our system is the best, 73%. Is it high or low? Well, what about in democracies? It's higher than that. I used the Taiwanese, the same survey conducted in Taiwan, in China. In Taiwan, 21% trusted institutions, 22% trusted leaders, 28% trusted, were proud to be a citizen, and 62% thought that their system is the best. I presented this in Taiwan, and they hated me. They said, our distrust is healthy. The trust in China is unhealthy. I said, that's another topic, but the facts are here. Maybe that's true. So the final thing about this political trust is these are photos. People are holding banners basically saying, we trust the central government, we hate the local government. So that explains why central government, how people vent their dissatisfaction at lower level, but with high level of central political trust. Finally, let me just go back and summarize this explanation. So you see the mass line ideology here and social capital together. They lead to contentious political participation in Chinese society, very high level. Then you have a very high level of government responsiveness. I didn't have time to explain. Actually, they tend, if you think about this, governments respond more if there are no elections. Because the Chinese government claims to represent the interest of the majority of Chinese people, right? But they have no proof. Elections are the easiest yardstick to show, hey, I got one more vote. I'm more legitimate than you. But if there are no competitive elections, you can't show that. So if you have 3 people protesting on the corner of the street, they get paranoid. So they tend to go out and say, just come back, and how much money you want, and just go home or pay it, right? And so there's a tendency to be very paranoid and to respond very quickly in an authoritarian society without elections. So government responsiveness, that leads to high level of political support, but the side effects is weak political institutions, underdevelopment rule of law and elections and rules and civil society. And related to that, if you have such a direct interaction between society and the government without the intermediate layers, and it can cause, if anything goes wrong, at the top that can, or anything goes wrong at the bottom, that can cause political earthquakes, political instability in the system. However, we do see, if you believe my survey results, it shows very high level of responsiveness and high level of political trust. Let me just stop here.
Thank you very much, Wenteng. Please pass your question cards to our volunteers who are going around. Raise your hand if you have cards you'd like to be collected. In just a moment, we'll start the question and answer period. While those are being collected, I want to remind you about our next two programs. Next week, Thursday, September 1st, Professor Christopher Roy of the U of I Art Department and the Elizabeth M. Stanley Faculty Fellow of African Art History will be presenting a talk on continuity and change in the political and cultural life of a small African country. Excuse me. Following week, Wednesday, September 7th, Raj Rajagopal, professor in the University of Iowa Department of Geographical Sciences and Sustainability, will present Iowa's award-winning wind term program in India. Okay, so I hope you will be able to attend those. And we'll begin our Q&A in just a minute. Okay, we've got lots of good questions coming in. All right, well, I will start with one that asks about the public opinion survey results that he's basing his research on. They presumably reflect primarily the Chinese ethnic majority population, but what about minorities such as the Uyghurs? Should I go here? Please do.
I don't know. I did surveys on the Uyghurs, but on national identity, actually, it's very high. And for school students, probably not for the unemployed Uyghur workers, migrant workers. But the Uyghurs have it's very interesting, they have very strong national identity and ethnic identity, right? If you think about in a 2x2 table, you can have both strong, both weak, one strong, and national identity strong, ethnic weak, or ethnic weak, national, ethnic strong, national identity weak, right? But in the Uyghur case, it's both. So it's a conditional support for me, and if you want me to support you, you gotta give me autonomy. So that kind of mentality, I think.
How do you assess the honesty of the responses you get in your surveys? If people are afraid that the government might retaliate against them, how can we be sure that they're answering honestly to the interviewer?
I think that that's a very common concern for people, for us who regularly conduct public opinion surveys, and for people outside. So I actually, in the book Bill mentioned, I wrote a whole chapter on that question, because if that doesn't hold, my whole theory just falls apart, right? So we did some additional, there are survey techniques developed by American scholars testing racism in the United States in survey questions. We use the same technique in China to test people's attitude about supporting their government. We found about 8% of people who might hide their opinion. So even if you just exclude the 8%, and let's say China is 70% now, about 70% support for the central government. If you exclude 8%, it's still one of the highest in the world. So that would be one response to this question. The second one is, if you think about how critical people are in China, it's not that sensitive of a question. Everybody thinks that they're cool to criticize the government now. And if you just blindly follow what the government says, people don't think you're cool. Particularly among younger people, even in their minds, in their hearts, they are supportive of the government. So I think the political sensitivity issue could be an issue, but it's not going to be that serious to show the opposite.
I like this next question. Let's see what you think, Wenteng. So the questioner asks, thinking back to when you were a young man still in China, if you had been asked the question about whether people in general can be trusted, how would you have responded?
I would probably say yes. I grew up in a revolutionary society, populist society. I went through the Cultural Revolution. I worked in a chemical factory, and I developed a very strong identity with my work unit, right? People from my work unit were my friends, and I trust them, so that mentality is still there.
All right, this is going to be less easy to answer maybe, but you actually are in a very good position having lived in the US for so long. The question is, are people in China freer politically than those in the United States?
Well, it depends on you ask a street person or you ask a political scientist, right? If you ask a political scientist, they tell you, hey, these are the channels for people to freely exercise their rights, right? Certainly in the United States, you have those very established channels, right? But I think the other measure of this political freedom is more of a perception, right? And perceived freedom, there actually is a question in the World Value Survey, how free do you feel? And then you see very high level of perceived freedom in Chinese society.
Everything in China is changing so rapidly. How do your survey results change from year to year? So for example, if you did a survey in 2008 and that was a particularly good time for China's economy or something, would that have changed in recent years if there's an economic slowdown?
Very good question. I think surveys are very sensitive to certain events, right? The political trust question has been asked over the 20 years in Chinese society. It's been consistently high. We have different waves of the World Value Surveys. Started from 1990. Every 5 years, it's repeated. That level never dropped. The other thing I didn't have to show you is interpersonal trust. If you look at over the years, again, I don't have time to show you the slide, but over 25 years, right, starting from 1990 until 2014, I have 10 public opinion surveys asking the same question about interpersonal trust. The level stayed from 50 to 60, high 60, low 50 to high 50. So so far it's been consistent.
There's so many great questions here. So I'm going to throw out one that builds on your talk a little bit because the questioner wants to have you say more about family ties and what is a family in China and the impact of the one child policy, which has shrunk the size of extended families and other things, and how that plays into maybe what the role of the family is in evolving public opinion.
Well, family is always important in Chinese culture. I'm not denying that. In my talk, I say that communal trust, people in your community you trust more, that contributes the most to interpersonal trust, to general trust. I didn't mean to say that it's not important. The level of trust in family members is low. I didn't mean to say that, and it's still very high, but it doesn't contribute to the general trust. That's one thing, but I'm not sure about the family planning question, that part of the question, but that one thing, if you observe Chinese politics here, one thing I learned coming to this country 30 years ago is when it says no, it means no, right? But one thing you need to learn in China is when it says no, it doesn't mean no. So one child policy, you just go to just rural China, it's just, there's no one child policy. So that's the, I would like to say.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we'll have to, I have to make this the final question for reasons of time. There's a lot of really good ones that I won't be able to get to. This comes from a couple of people, and they would like to hear more about public opinion in China concerning the government's policy toward the South China Sea and the foreign policy issues that are arising now in that part of the world.
Well, I think the current government in China is using, of course, it thinks that is the core of the Chinese national interest, right? But in terms of its impacting political support by people, I think it's playing a very useful role for the Chinese government to be tough in foreign policy, particularly in the South China Sea area, to show that China can stand up against the United States, and that's good for the Chinese government to gain further political support in China.
All right, well, we have to conclude our program now. On behalf of the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council, I want to thank Wenteng Tang for his remarks today, and also thank our sponsors, University of Iowa International Programs, the U of I Honors Program, the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization, and today's financial sponsors, Dave, Denise, and Mike Tiffany, and Janet Linus and John Wadsworth. Thanks also to City Channel 4 for making our program available to viewing audiences. Wenteng, as a small token of our appreciation, I'm happy to present you with the coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're adjourned.